I don't already know. Proselytize it on the TV show. Well, there's fireside chats, there's pats on the back, there's money on the side, and a belly upright because the telephone rang. Damn thing. The dog up and died, and the willow man lied. The dog up and died, and the willow man lied. The dog up and died, and the willow man lied. The dog up and died, and the willow man lied. The dog.
Call this meeting of the Tacoma Park City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll? I'm here.
Councilmember Daniels Cohen. Here. Councilmember Grimes.
Here.
Councilmember Mail.
Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
There are no additional agenda items. For the upcoming agenda items, I'll just point out that this Wednesday, May 16th, the City Council will be touring Tacoma Junction from 6:30 to 8:30. And next Thursday, May 24th, the City Council will be having a tree canopy tour from 6:30 to 8:30. Next Monday, we will be having a presentation from the redistricting task force. We'll be having second reading of the various ordinances adopting the budget and tax rates. And we will also have the resolutions, one urging repeal of the National Defense Authorization Act and of the indefinite detention provisions, and another one supporting the federal budget reprioritization towards investment in state and local communities. And that kind of takes care of the next couple of weeks. We'll go at this point to public comment. Is there anybody who'd like to make any comments at public comment period? Seeing none, yes? Okay. We will go to council comments. Oh, and I see a light over from here. Let me check what that is.
Mary Williams, I just heard this afternoon that the redistricting task force will be asking for a 1-week extension to
Well,
council.
we'll have to see whether they get it or not.
Okay.
So I just didn't want people to expect it.
Okay, thank you. So the redistricting task force may, in fact, not be here next week. Council comments. Councilmember Daniels Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor Williams. This is just a little bit more of a verbal tour of the junction, just to continue to get everyone prepared for the actual tour on Wednesday, May 16th. This time I'm featuring Tacoma Framers. It's another special niche store, and it's been in business since 1970 and owned by the Howard family. The business and the building are both owned by the Howard family. Tacoma Framers does exactly that. It frames. It's a family operation run by Mark Howard at this time. I think as good a price on matting and framing as you can get anywhere in the Washington metropolitan area, and the craftsmanship is excellent. There are often a few knickknacks hanging around at the store that are also for sale. Tacoma Framers is well worth checking out for your next framing job. Okay, just a couple of announcements from me. Please meet the council, and this I'm underlining Mayor Williams, in the City Lot on Wednesday, May 16th at 6:30 for Beyond the Verbal Tour of the Junction. This will be the real thing with a captive audience and some moments to chat about what you suggest for the Junction. It's a very interesting part of our city with some great history. May 18th is Bike to Work Day, and I have a feeling there are a few people up here who might even be bikers to work on that day. But Tacoma Park has 3 pit stops. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the first year that we've had 3.
That's correct.
It may even be the first year we've had any, or the first year we've...
We've had them.
We've had them?
One.
One, but now we have 3. And they're going to be in the Old Town Gazebo, Sligo Creek Trail at New Hampshire Avenue, and the Tacoma Langley Crossroads by Starbucks. Great partnering in putting this together with Tacoma Bicycle, the Green Commuter, Old Tacoma Business Association, Starbucks, and the Crossroads Development Authority. After all, May is Bike Month. Just a quick announcement about the semi-annual library sale Saturday, May 19th from 10 to 3 on the grounds of the library. It is sponsored by the Friends of the Tacoma Park, Maryland Library, and all the proceeds go to fund their special programs for the city, for the children, and for anyone who's a library kind of a person. So, now I've planned all your activities from Wednesday through Saturday. I'm going beyond to land on gold stars for Sunday. Who would have thought 5 years ago when the young activists and a few old activists, I would be one of those, lobbied to save the Piney Branch indoor swimming pool and keep it open, that we would be celebrating a 5th anniversary this month. Huge gold stars to the Adventist Community Services with Ron Wiley at the helm for being the foundation, and even more gold stars to Joyce Siemens for being the mortar that has held it together and continue to produce more and better programs. I believe that part of the pool program, in partnership with the PTA, is to make sure that all 4th graders have swimming lessons. This may be the only school in Montgomery County that still has the program. Please stop by the pool on Sunday, bathing suits in hand, actually probably better on your body than in hand, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for an open house and experience one of Tacoma Park's true jewels. Congratulations to the ACS and Joyce Siemens for a really special job, and also one that's very well done. That's it for me.
And I'll follow up on your Bike to Work Day comments by pointing out that last Wednesday was Bike to School Day, and I participated in the event here on Maple Avenue, and I know that the police were told to expect 25 to 30 students on bicycles, and they were prepared to close one lane of the road for the couple of blocks for the Bike to School Day. And in fact, there were about 130 students and 30 adults, so they had to close the whole road. And it was a great program, great event, great turnout. And then I'll also just say that I spent the better part of today in Annapolis, testifying before 3 committees on the opening of the special session. I testified at the Senate Budget and Tax Committee, the House Appropriations Committee, and the House Ways and Means Committee, pleading on behalf of Tacoma Park and also on behalf of the Maryland Municipal League for restoration of highway user revenues. Don't hold your breath. But we need to be there. We need to remind them that we need these, and we are not going to go away. They need to fix this. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And I thought you may be interested to know that our most faithful public attendee at the council meetings, is not with us tonight because he's ill, but he sent his regards and said he'll be back next week. But I did want to make sure the public was aware that work has begun, the state has begun work on Piney Branch Road from the district line to University Boulevard, and that work will be ongoing, including some safety upgrades and resurfacing of the road, and that should be completed by the end of July. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, seeing none. City Manager, have any comments?
I just wanted to share with the council that a little bit after 7, we got an update from Michelle Douglas, who's been obviously tracking things in Annapolis. What she shared was as of 6:55 tonight, the Senate had completed its bill hearings in the Budget and Taxation Committee, passed the 3 bills of the tax and budget package favorably out of committee, and to use her words, just finished staving off numerous amendments on the Senate floor. During second reader, the Senate is going to return tomorrow morning at 10:30 to begin the process of taking final votes on the 3 bills. And she also shared that both the House Appropriations Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee, as Mayor just indicated, had their respective bill hearings today, and that committee votes are expected in the House tomorrow on Tuesday, following their 10 a.m. session. So it looks like everything is moving along. And
the amendments that were proposed, I'm sure, were amendments to cut more, spend less, no taxes, and gee, we're happy with the doomsday budget, just leave it alone and let's go home. We don't need to do this, as opposed to, no, we need to be proactive in setting priorities.
And the only other thing I was just going to share is just a reminder that on Thursday, the County Council will be taking final action on their reconciliation items, which does include additional money for Tacoma Park for our police payment. So stay tuned, and we'll see how that works out.
Thank you. Any questions for the City Manager? Seeing none, we will move along. We have one set of minutes from March 12th. Would somebody like to move adoption?
Move.
Second. Okay, they've been moved and seconded. All those in favor of the March 12th minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are adopted. We will now move to our regular meeting, and this is first reading ordinance adopting the fiscal year 2013 tax rate. Would the city manager like to make any comments on this or any of the items when we get to them, just so I know whether you want to introduce anything, you want us to go forward with it?
You all can just go forward. The only thing I tried to do on the agenda cover sheet is just note the changes that had been made, reflecting the council's discussion during the reconciliation process.
Okay.
There is a complete listing of all the changes that were made since the time I submitted my proposed budget to you in early April, so hopefully that information tracks with the decisions that you made, and if you have any questions, certainly I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, first I'll check and see if anybody has anything that they think didn't get reflected accurately from our reconciliation discussion in this ordinance. Seeing none, then I will just move along to one item that I wondered after the meeting whether I was surprised that we hadn't adopted one particular item, which was on the pilot project for the recycling carts, and I wondered whether people felt that accurately reflected where we wanted to be or whether we wanted to go forward with that. And if we did, whether we wanted to do something like decide to do that tonight, and we could always amend the tax rate budget at first, make the change so that it was amended at second reading. So if we wanted to do that, we could do that tonight. I just wanted to mention that. It's not going to affect the tax rate, but just wanted to bring that up.
Mayor Williams, you're referring to Councilmember Mail's proposal?
Yes.
I'm unclear where the uncertainty is. Some of us supported it, but...
And some didn't, and I just wanted to make sure that we had an accurate reflection of where the council wanted to go. And because at that point you had dropped off the call, and just wanted to make sure that it seemed,
So
I was expecting to see that there was a majority in favor, and there wasn't, and I wanted to make
And
sure
it was
that
3
that
to
was-
3.
Right. So
I'm in favor of it.
Okay. So that,
By the way,
go ahead.
Councilmember Daniels Cohen asked me similarly about the library operating hours on Sundays, and I support that as well. But I believe that that was also a nearly tied situation, and that there was a decision to come back to that in approximately 6 months.
Right. There were a number of items that people talked about
Yeah.
where we said we would come back to them in January. So if we, and for the most part, those involved staffing changes. And we were saying, well, gee, let's hold off, let's see how some of these other staffing changes go. That we may need to develop some things. 6 months' time will probably make it a lot clearer and a lot easier to do something like that. So we committed to coming back in January, or the appropriate time, if it happens to be before January, to take a look at those and revisit those. We'll also, at that point, have a chance to know what the state and what the county have done with their budgets, which are not finalized at this point. So I just wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to acknowledge those things, see if there was something like the recycling carts that we wanted to change. We can do that and give council colleagues an opportunity to speak to that. Councilmember Daniels Cohen.
I was just going to ask, is it possible that we come back before January on some of those issues, specifically the library opening, because January is going to push it into the springtime. I'd just like to see it open, if we can get it open during the winter at least, for the youngsters on Sundays. So it's possible to revisit?
We were talking January as kind of the 6 months into the year, good time to reevaluate, but it may be that depending on what else happens, that there's a reason to get to something a little earlier than that.
Okay.
So January was kind of the placeholder, it's not a hard and fast.
Okay, so it's a possibility that it could be sooner. All right.
Correct. Councilmember Mayle.
Thank you, Mayor. I would appreciate the opportunity for us to vote or straw poll again on the issue of the recycling pilot. I was surprised at how interested staff was in that pilot, both the Housing Community Development Program or Department and obviously Public Works. And I think I provided documentation to many of you of, as far as I could tell, a very honest appraisal with no evidence to the contrary that whenever people adopt a pilot like that, it results in increased recycling. So, in my view, a pilot like that would be a very it would be a great thing to test. On a second, do you want to go one at a time, or do you want to? I was going to.
Go ahead and finish your
Okay.
finish your comments, and then
My
I'll
second
get other comments.
comment would be a question to Councilmember Snipper, because I noted when you were remote on the question of the library hours, you voted in favor of at least having that issue continue to be developed, but then when we voted last week, you indicated opposition to the idea. And so I just am curious as to the nature of your votes.
Well, thank you for raising that. I listened very carefully to what the Recreation Director talked about when he talked about the two issues that he identified, at least two issues that he identified. One was it's difficult to get staff on Sunday, and that if the person who is normally there is sick or whatever, it's very hard to get a replacement person to show up. That was one issue. And the other was that their experience on previous Sundays and in other places is that Sunday is a very low-traffic day. Now, of course, it's a low-traffic day, maybe just because it hasn't been advertised, but those were the two things that were of concern to me. Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
I think that the budget that we're presented with, between all of us here, have put together to this point in time is a good budget. I know that between the city manager adding positions, much-needed critical positions, and many of the good ideas proposed by various members of the city council here. We've added a bunch of stuff to the budget, but yet the general fund, the general fund balance seems to come out almost unaffected, just a slight decrease in the general fund balance, which is a good sign. And we're able to maintain the tax rate. My hope would be that next year we might even be able to see the tax rate come down. And in a year's time, we'll have a better idea of what's going to happen to the national and the world's economy, which seems to be in such an incredible state of flux even today after so many years of uncertainty. And I think this is a conservative, cautious budget despite all the various ideas that have been added. I'm so glad to be able this year, after the last 2 years, to even be able to consider adding things to the budget. The last two budget seasons were hard on everybody, the people, not just the people here. It's easiest on us of all people, but on the staff who've had to struggle with shortages of staffing and stuff like that. And I'm really pleased that this year we can begin to add something back. I mean, like adding some money for the books for the library is something we couldn't even thought of doing in fiscal year 11, for example. I think it's a good thing. With regard to Councilmember Mayle's addition of $8,000 as a pilot, I don't see that that's I don't have strong feelings about it one way or the other. So if it's a close vote, I'm happy to go along with that. The rest of the things, though, I do think we need to be very cautious and postpone, like you were just discussing, any plans for expanding or adding additional programs. Who knows? I think maybe in 6 months, I hope that we'll have a little bit better sense of how well the city's doing in terms of its revenue and its revenue outlook.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to elaborate slightly on what I said earlier with regard to the Sunday library hours. I'm very supportive of Sunday hours for the community center, but I think it would require more than just opening the library. I would like to see an effort to bring programs to the community center as well, not just the opening the library. So for me, if it's just the library, then would be less supportive than if it were a whole effort to bring programs to both the library and the community center. And with regard to the recycle bins, I have come to understand Fred's position. Because I heard from some constituents that they would favor seeing the pilot go forward, even though they are concerned about the larger bins being a bit hard to maneuver for some people and the difficulty of hilly terrain, having wheeled bins on hilly terrain. But the advantage of a pilot is you find that out. You find out whether that turns out to be a big issue, small issue, or not. So I'd be in favor of adding the pilot.
Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
I'd also be in favor of adding a pilot because I agree. I mean, the only way to find something out is to test it and see if it's going to work. I'd like to, if we go there, I'd like to know if there's any way we can find out how much recycling is going on in X space and whether or not this actually does increase the amount of recycling that happens. Because I think that's the premise, that it will increase because there's a larger bin. That's my number one thing. My number two thing is part of the reason I want the hours for the library. Our foot would be in the door to have hours back for the community center and programming for the community center on Sundays as well. I've always said marketing, marketing, marketing. If you market it, and people know about it, they'll come. And so it would be just a waste to only have someone staffing the front desk and not actually having activities happening in the building. I just, it was, I felt like my little tutor was in the door with the library and then having the building opened as well. And then I was going to push for activities, so.
I think that can be referred to as opening Pandora's box.
Well, it could be, yes, it could be Pandora's box, but it's still, the building was open, and it hasn't been open for the last 2 years, correct? And it was a budgetary issue, that's why it got closed. It was a 2 years ago budgetary issue. So that's, that's a part of it. I mean, the library's really important to me, as it is to the constituents. As I said last week, I've never, in my experience as an activist or anything, gotten as many responses about something as I got about opening the library on Sunday. It was just huge. So even sidewalks, speed bumps, none of it got as many responses as that did. Thank you.
Councilmember Snipper.
The one additional comment, observation I'll make is that when Community Center was open on Sunday, there was very few people here. There were many Sundays when it was very lightly attended. It's hard to justify the staff here. But as several council members have noted, if you don't have outreach and marketing and so on, that would be what you'd expect.
Councilmember Mayo.
Just the one comment I'd add on the library and community center open hours is that if we do at some point go forward with it, one thing I would support would be having school year Sunday hours, but during the summer not having summer hours. I'm assuming that summer is particularly a low time of use for any function on a weekend inside, and it's particularly parents that communicating to me about this issue of people with two working parents trying to get to the library on weekends, and that's the group that they have less of a need for that on in the summer as well.
And I'll just make a couple general comments about the budget. I think that the process this year, we started earlier. We considered a number of discrete pieces kind of before getting into the budget. I think part of that was as a result of our ongoing process of wanting to take these things up earlier to give them some consideration. I think we had a chance to do that more than ever. I think also part of it was driven by the fact that we have three of us who are new on this body, and everybody felt that it would be good to make sure that there was a clear understanding of what we were trying to do and what some of the kind of the supporting policies and the strategic plan and understanding ways that the budget can affect a number of different areas of importance to the council. I think it was nice to be able to consider adding back some small pieces, even if it was just the late consideration of $15,000 for filing help for the city clerk. It was just identifying some places where a little bit of extra help would really make a difference in the kinds of things that happen in the city, the kinds of help that the staff needs, given that there was a 5% reduction in our workforce in FY11, which was a first. And I'm gratified that we had just the littlest opportunity to do that. I think we've taken a pretty conservative approach to the budget as a whole, and I think that's the way we need to do that. And as we go forward and we see what's happening with the state budget and the county budget, we'll be able to understand a little bit more of what some possibilities are. It was interesting to hear the questioning back and forth among the, particularly the delegates today. The Senate made fairly short order of things. There were a lot of questions in the House about kind of what the status is of local governments, how the state budget and local budgets interact. There was a lot of concern about the credit rating of the state. If they didn't take certain actions, would it jeopardize their AAA bond rating? And if it did, that would have a ripple-down effect on local governments and our bond ratings for the kinds of things that we can borrow on. In many cases, we fall under a larger jurisdiction's bond rating for those abilities, so that all these things that take place at the state and the county level and teacher pensions and all of those various pieces have a trickle-down effect on us, even if it's indirect, or we think that it doesn't have much of an effect, it does. And so I think the approach that we've taken is the right approach, and I look forward to seeing how these small changes can work going forward over the next few months as the city manager and the staff try and integrate some of these small changes and see if there's a way, if there's an opportunity in 6 months or 9 months or whatever the period of time is, an opportunity for us to go forward with some of these things. I think we'll have a better idea and go into it knowing that we've done some of the work ahead of time to figure it out, rather than kind of saying, well, here's some money, do something with it, and then coming back many months later and going, well, gee, not much has happened. Gee, we thought we were going to do this. We've had that experience, and I don't think we want to repeat that experience. So I'm happy with this going forward, and it sounds like I believe we have not moved the ordinance yet. So what I would, given that I have heard support for making that one change for the recycling pilot, what we can do when we get to that point is somebody can move it with that amendment, and we will have that incorporated into the second reading of the budget so that we see the language at second reading so that everything is all tidied up. Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I want to underline what you just said. I really have appreciated how we've gone after the budget. It's been a very educational experience for me, and I know I'm pushing hard for the library, extended hours, and the community center, but I really appreciate all the changes and the bits that we've extended some of the monies, especially the team programming, at the Computer Learning Center, and more books for the library. So I thank you very much for, however we did it, we did it really well. So I appreciate that. Appreciate all the work that, my goodness gracious, that it takes to make this beast come alive.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. We've talked a lot of trash tonight, but I'm not sure where that recycling bins ended up.
Yeah.
I heard a lot of support for those, or more support than at our last session when we had an even number of council members. So are we considering taking a straw vote again?
We can do that now.
Okay. I would suggest we do that so we can move along.
Okay. Just a quick little hand vote of those who would be supportive of adding that recycling item into the budget. So,
Wait a minute.
All 7 hands went up.
They
moved from
There was a late hand, but we had 7
Oh, I'm
hands.
sorry, I was busy reading the funny pages.
Oh, great, then you don't know what you voted for.
It's all right. Next time we need that, he'll just give you a nudge. Councilmember Mayle.
This is an unrelated question on the budget documentation that we received today versus the original. Should I bring that up now, or it's for the city manager? I just don't know a process like where we're going.
I think it was just noting that in the cover sheet only, the constant yield rate had been stated incorrectly, and that the correct rate is in the ordinance.
The question I was trying to resolve was, I'm just curious why the intergovernmental proposed revenue in the special fund went from 1.2 million roughly to 950,000. It's on from the budget table, page 24, and the appendix. I'm not sure what page that is, but it's the special revenue fund summary.
It would be that we weren't, the original budget that I submitted assumed that all the program open space funds would be expended in FY13, and based on the projects identified to date, that did not appear to be the case. So it's not that the funds won't be coming in, it's a timing issue.
Okay, thank you. And the reason I asked was just because I was looking for that 650,000-ish change in expected revenue from the county budget.
That will depend on Thursday's vote.
Okay.
So we're hopeful, but it is on the reconciliation list in 3 pieces, basically a quarter and a half. We could get 100% of it, we could get none of it, and that's up to the county council.
Thank you.
Councilmember Snipper.
And a follow-up question on the same page. In our, in today's thing here, a couple lines down, it has expenditures for general government. And that we're on the special revenue fund summary. And it shows 10,500.
Which page are you on? What's the title?
Special revenue fund summary. We were just on that page. That's why I was.
Well, yeah, but I didn't go there.
10. It just caught my eye.
It would be the expenditure of cable funds.
Okay.
Is that correct, Yolanda?
Yeah.
Yes. I can look in my budget book because all the projects are identified, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, you can just catch me later. Just, it's fine.
Okay. Any other comments? Let me just add one thing to what I said before. I want to make sure that we take a moment to thank the city manager and the staff for their diligent work in, first, putting this whole budget together, and second, being available and addressing the concerns and the questions that council members raised about various items, various changes, various possible reconciliation items. We appreciate all of the fine effort that went into providing that information in a timely fashion. I know sometimes we as a group did not get you those requests as quickly as you had hoped, and it caused you some, probably some heartburn and some late nights in the office. We recognize that and appreciate that and promise to do better.
Councilmember Snipper, it would be funding from the Cable Equipment Grant Fund.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, would somebody like to move this ordinance?
Are we moving all three or just one?
We're going to move one at a time.
Okay, move
And are you moving that with that,
with the
with that
change.
amendment for that 8,000?
But that's actually in the
The
budget,
first ordinance
not-
up is the tax
It's
rate.
just the tax rate.
Oh, well, then what am I looking at here?
I think you're jumping over.
First one's the
Oh, okay, see, that's why I get going on the, I look at the tax rate and then I go, no, we're down on the other ones. Okay, so this is the tax rate, sorry. You're moving the tax rate.
Right.
And it's, you moved it and somebody.
Second.
Councilmember Schultz seconded it. Any public comment on the tax rate?
Mayor Williams, could you clarify who moved the tax rate ordinance?
Councilmember
please?
Snipper.
Okay.
And Councilmember Schultz seconded. Councilmember Grimes.
Yes, I want to state what I've stated previously, that I oppose the increase in the rate for personal property taxes paid by businesses. I will note that we have had discussions, and one of the items that the council agreed to consider approximately 6 months from now is a matching grant program for businesses to upgrade their facades and interiors. So on the one hand, we'd be taking away from businesses revenues, and on the other hand, we'd be giving it. And the businesses that will be affected are many, many, many small businesses in Tacoma Park. The Walgreens are the exceptions around here. So I just wanted to note again my opposition to the increase in personal property taxes, although in rates, that is, although I will vote for this item. Thank you.
So noted, thanks. Any other comments? Okay, all those in favor of this ordinance establishing a tax rate of the continuation of 58 cents a year, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. We will move to agenda item number 2, which is a first reading ordinance adopting fiscal year 2013 stormwater budget. First, we will need to vote to convene as the Stormwater Management Board. Would somebody like to move that?
I'll move it.
Moved by Councilmember Snipper, seconded by Councilmember Schultz. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We're now in session as the Tacoma Park Stormwater Board. Would somebody like to move the ordinance adopting the budget?
Move.
Second.
Same ones. They're in good form this evening.
Cahoots.
It's a cabal.
Yep, okay. It's the Tacoma Park Council cabal. Any comments by the council on the stormwater budget? Any public comments on the stormwater budget? Seeing none on either count, all those in favor of the first reading ordinance adopting the fiscal year 2013 stormwater budget, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. We will move to the first reading ordinance adopting the FY13 budget. And whoever moves that can add that as amended piece in.
I move it with the amendment.
Seconded.
Okay, we're going to stick with the tried and true nominators and seconders. First read, any comments on the budget that we haven't already made? Any public comments on the FY 2013 budget? All those in favor as amended, as moved, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. We will now move to agenda item number 4, which is the first reading ordinance amending the City of Tacoma Park Police Employees Retirement Plan to conform with two changes required by the Federal Heroes Earnings Assistance and Relief Act of 2008. A mouthful.
Yes, it is. The specific federal law change is the Heroes Earning Assistance and Relief Tax Act of 2008, which is often referred to as the Hart Amendments. These are basically technical amendments that were flagged for us through the Pension Board attorney, Mr. Madden. The Pension Board did have the opportunity to discuss these amendments, which are really not discretionary. There is some discretion within them, but certain sections must be amended to be compliant with federal law. Mr. Madden did write a fairly detailed explanation of the various changes. So city staff is recommending that the council adopt these changes tonight, and they were also endorsed by the Pension Board. We discussed them at some length.
Okay, thanks for that information. Councilmember Snipper.
Quick question. Has there been any reaction from the police union on that?
Their representative on the board did not have any concerns about it. It really actually is beneficial to anyone who...
That's what I thought, too.
Yeah, has military service and...
Right.
Any other questions, comments on this item?
The only other thing I was just going to note for the record is there is a letter in your packet from the actuaries for the plan just noting that the fiscal impact of these amendments is insignificant.
Right.
Okay, any public comment on this ordinance amending the retirement plan? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Mayor
Yes.
Williams, I didn't hear a
Oh, we
motion
didn't,
maker
motion.
for this.
We're moving too quickly.
We
The
have
same
to
ones
move.
want to do it?
Sure.
Oh, all right.
Okay, moved by Councilmember Snipper, seconded by Councilmember Schultz. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Moving to agenda item number 5, this is the second reading ordinance awarding contract for executive search services to the selection of a new police chief. We had first reading last week. This was to award the contract to the Mercer Group. Does somebody want to move this?
Move.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Daniels-Cohen. Any council comments on this? Any public comments? This is a second reading ordinance, so we'll need a roll call vote. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Daniels Cohen.
Yes.
Councilmember Grimes.
Aye.
Councilmember Mail.
Yes.
Councilmember Schultz.
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Snipper.
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. We have a consent agenda, which consists of a single reading ordinance authorizing purchase and installation of building security upgrades and a resolution recognizing National Public Works Week. Would somebody like to move the consent agenda?
Move.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Snipper, seconded by Councilmember Schultz. This is it includes a first reading, a single reading ordinance, so we'll need a roll call vote on the consent agenda.
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Daniels Cohen.
Yes.
Councilmember Grimes.
Aye.
Councilmember Mail.
Aye.
Councilmember Schultz.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Aye.
That passes unanimously as well. We have 2 remaining items on our agenda this evening. They are work session items. I think maybe what we can do is just move forward with these items, and if we get really long with them, we'll take a break, but if we don't, then we will be finished relatively early for a change, and people might welcome that. So why don't we just move to the work session items? And the first one is the reconstituting the Safe Roadways Committee and the Committee on the Environment. Who wants to introduce this one? Do you all want to?
I think the cover sheet speaks for itself. We, Councilmember Mail had, and possibly some others worked on this as well, had prepared revisions to the Committee on the Environment Ordinance, and those are included in the packet. And for the Safe Roadways Committee, Councilmember Grimes and Daniels Cohen and possibly others worked on revisions to that. One thing that the staff, the city manager, maybe I'll let her speak for herself here.
Just as noted under the special consideration, just a few comments. The current language in both talks about the city manager or his or her designee shall provide additional staff support and funding to support the committee's activities. I would suggest some modification in terms of the funding language, because obviously I don't fund committees. That's a council role. There is some funding currently included in the proposed budget that you just had first reading on, but I would just suggest that language be tweaked, since it's really not appropriate for me to be making unilateral decisions of who gets funding. And the only other comment I just wanted to note is obviously both these committees have been inactive for a period of several years. Obviously going into the budget, we weren't anticipating staff support, so I think it's just maybe a helpful discussion this evening in terms of what you envision in terms of staff support for both these committees. I know just from past council discussions, there sometimes are different ideas about to what extent staff should be supporting committees, and I would just like to make sure I have a good sense of that when your discussion concludes this evening.
Okay. And so why don't we, maybe if I can turn to, if we want to do the, just in the order that they're in the packet, we've got the Committee on the Environment first. Why don't we do it in that order? And kind of, maybe I'll just say, if there's anybody who wants to make general comments about the 2 of them, and then we'll move to a discussion of the Committee on the Environment, so we can kind of keep that. Councilmember Grimes, did you have a general comment? Okay.
Yeah. My comment regards staff support for committees. I've served on 4 committees, I think, now, and those committees have had varying levels of staff participation, ranging from staff who attended every meeting to staff who attended next to no meetings. We've had staff go out and do research for us, meaning make phone calls, compile information. In other cases, that hasn't happened. We've had staff do copying and so on. I think that there's no reason not to move toward a model of minimal staff involvement so far as especially administrative matters are concerned, research and so on. That would decrease the impact on staff hours, the demands on staff hours, I should say. If it's a matter of copying and so on, committee members can often do that kind of stuff themselves. Further, when it comes to setting up email lists and web pages and so on, some committees are going to have those capabilities and others not. But we're talking about, in those cases, by reconstituting 2 committees, a really small increment on the number of committees that are operating already. So I think that going forward, that they're similarly to how the language of the city code has, the revisions here attempt to bring that in line with the language for other committees. You might think of City Manager Matthews about how to standardize staff support for committees, including basically tossing off certain duties that the committees can do themselves.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just like to voice strong support for Councilmember Grimes' suggestion for staff support. And I would like to also add that I don't think staff members need to attend all the meetings, and in fact should only attend when requested by the committee themselves. Thank you.
Councilmember Daniels Cohen.
I'm also in support of Councilmember Grimes' comments about staff support. I've also been involved with a number of committees, and staff support has been actually minimal. The only one that really has staff present is the Emergency Preparedness Committee, and that's an excellent staff called the City Clerk, so who actually does give great direction. But I think we should just, move forward. No reason not to move forward to a model that has a minimal staff interaction.
If I can just take a second and check with either the clerk or the city manager to see if there are some examples of existing committees where there is a higher level and that seems to be necessary or required, and whether that is peculiar to those, whether I'm looking for a little sense of whether the direction that the council comments seem to be moving seems appropriate in general cases, whether you've got any observations on that.
I know the committees that the Housing and Community Development Department works with, the Washington Land Use Committee, and of course the Facade Advisory Board has staff, quite a bit of staff support. WALAC does. The Arts and Humanities Commission, I do believe that Sarah attends every meeting, almost every meeting.
And is your sense that those are that way because they need to be, or that way because that's what staff assumed they should be doing?
Well, the Facade Advisory Board, certainly because of their role in reviewing plans and so on, most likely does need staff support. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you could certainly talk to the chairs, but my sense is that the WALAC committee depends very heavily on Sarah to provide a number of organizational functions. I haven't talked to Sarah about it recently, but I do know there's certain committees that really don't see their role as taking minutes. I'm just saying, I know that has come up, though, in the past. I think the Tree Commission, I think the arborist typically, does he attend?
The Tree Commission generally does not have the arborist present unless there's a hearing. If there's a hearing, of course, he is there with the city attorney.
Yeah, and I think COLTA usually, because of the nature of their work, typically does have staff present, is my impression, more organizationally.
Right. They have one business meeting a year, and then everything else is hearings with
But
COLTA.
so it sounds like so far what you've said is there are some cases where it seems to be necessary, and maybe some cases where it isn't, and the crossover at this point might be that there are some committees who think that it's not their role to take minutes, and maybe we should tell them that it is their role to take minutes.
I think that would be more of a council function than truly a staff function.
Right. But it's helpful to have that input so that we know that, we don't want to be saying, gee, they can all do with less in a vacuum and not realize that there are some implications that we haven't considered because you know what they are.
And certainly, I think there are certain committees that rely more heavily on staff to do certain research or appropriately to pose questions about city processes and procedures. I know during the Junction Task Force, there were some questions about the city's procurement processes in terms of disposal of land, things of that nature, which obviously the city staff would be in the best position to answer those types of questions.
And then there are other committees that just go along and have their meetings and do their things and provide minutes as needed to the clerk so that those can be made public, but they go about doing their work.
Right.
Yes.
I should also say I do attend all meetings of the Board of Elections, and I have been attending the redistricting task force meetings. In both those cases, I'm not taking their minutes. They're both dealing with them on their own. But I'm just there, especially with the Board of Elections, I'm there because there's a certain amount of collaboration that's involved in that, I think, and I think they want me there. And then the last group that comes to mind is the Nuclear Free Committee, where in all honesty, I think they might benefit from a staff member being there. But a staff member doesn't attend. Ethics Commission is another one. Staff doesn't attend unless requested. So
So it
there's
sounds,
a variety.
there's a broad mix of what current practice is and what requirements either are or might be. Councilmember Mail.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just following up on this issue, I guess I would, I had been under the impression that staffing for almost all committees was generally very minimal. And so what I've just learned is quite different from that. And in particular, after our discussions about budget and the capacity in the Housing and Community Development Department, the level of staffing for committees is a bit of a concern for me because there were a number of things that we couldn't do because we didn't have staff capacity. And so our program director, our department director is the one, my understanding is the one staffing many committees. And that concerns me because there was some of the things that we talked about over the last few weeks are of higher priority to me than every meeting of these committees. What I'd like us to do going forward, and if we need to do it in a form of a resolution or other structure, but whenever we have the committee present their annual report, I'd really like for, along with that report, there to be a briefing, a summary of staff hours spent in the previous year staffing that committee. In particular, attendance at meetings, but if there's research hours, then that would be helpful too, but attendance. So if there are 20 hours or 50 hours or 2 hours that staff are spending on a committee, I think it would be, it's really important to know that. And I think that would also be a way, in keeping with Councilmember Grimes' proposal to move toward fewer staff hours on issues like research, that would be a way to help track that for us. And I don't know if that makes sense to other council members, but I'd really want to see that.
I think probably everybody's shaking their heads going, yes, that would be helpful. Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. So I actually wanted to direct a question to Councilmember Mail. Since the Committee on the Environment is more closely a follow-on to the Task Force on Environmental Action, I'm wondering what level of staff support the task force had.
Very minimal.
And could you have used more?
Yes.
Can you quantify that at all?
Had I had known that staff support was an option, we would have certainly asked for help in better understanding what the city currently does. So there were often the committee there was not much certainty around, are we talking about something that's been there, done, or been there, done that with the city already, or not? So it's sort of historic record issues. And then questions of feasibility priorities were things that could have been helped. So the latter part of the task force, when the task force moved into really a decision-making phase, the decision-making tended to be structured by just individual members of the task force saying, well, I think this would be more important, that would be more important. It would have really, especially because a lot of it was sort of, a little bit up in the air, those discussions would have been significantly, I think, improved by the Public Works Director in most cases, being there to say, that's a good idea, or that would be a tough thing to do. That would have changed probably the outcome of the final report of the task force. So my sense for that committee is if we had had more participation early on, and maybe if we'd asked for it. I don't mean to suggest that staff would have turned down our request, but more participation early on and then more participation later in the process, that probably would have been helpful in a very meaningful way that would have improved the report, improved our ability to move forward afterwards. We see where we are now with trying to figure out what to do next, and I'm assuming some of that would have been fixed.
I just make a comment about that last part. What to do? We haven't talked about. We've talked in the past, but not today, about council involvement in committees and the what to do next. My impression is that many committees would have a better sense of that if there were more council involvement.
Can I
Not
just
staff
follow up on
involvement,
that?
council involvement.
On both points, I think it would be a helpful thing if 4 committees, maybe at the same time as we receive their annual reports, if they were given some sort of clarity around, the expectations they could have. You can request staff participation for, limited duration, or you can request, and not that we would have to say yes, but you can request council members to come. Literally, as a having served on a number of committees, I just sort of took for granted that, nope, the council was not going to come to committee meetings. I don't think we ever thought to ask. We never, in the committees I served on, we never debated the issue of maybe we could get, Mayor Porter to come, or maybe we could get Mayor Williams to come to a meeting. And I think if we had known that, it might have been, I think it would have been helpful and potentially important.
I recognize that Councilmember Siemens came to quite a number, I believe, of the meetings of the task force on tax and service duplication issues, and his presence and Joyce Siemens' presence was helpful. She was on the committee, actually, was helpful. Thank you.
So it sounds like we have some places that we want to make it clearer to committees what the expectations and the possibilities are for staff support, for council availability, for staff availability if they have needs or questions. Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. Since we're talking about this, I've often wondered what kind of orientation a new committee gets, or does does a committee get a little handout from the clerk or whatever concerning some of these guidelines? Because it occurs to me that if that orientation or the sheet included some of the comments that have been made, if you need staff support, contact us. If you're expected to do your own minutes except under, special circumstances, and I would suggest that, you can request that council members attend, but that it not be a requirement or regular thing. And if the staff drafted up some guidance like that for the council to take a look at, I think that might solve some of these problems.
Councilmember Mayo, I don't know if you were there at the first meeting of the task force on environmental action. I'm thinking you were probably there. I don't know if you recall that Barb and I came to that meeting and sort of tried to give a little introduction about what the requirements are and what the expectations were, and I believe offered certain help, minimal help at that point. Was that helpful at all, or is it so long ago that you don't remember what it was?
So.
Yeah.
It may not have been helpful enough.
Perhaps.
It clearly had not stuck in people's minds by the end in terms of staff support. That was really I remember that discussion coming up. Sort of people saying, "I wish we had Daryl here."
It sounds like no matter what the orientation for the beginning of a committee, it might be helpful if we have a kind of a FAQ or, a 101 version of, here's basic things about all committees. Remember that there, that you have bylaws, that you have minutes requirements, that this, that, and the other thing, and maybe like those things get sent out to the committees, like, I don't know, January 1st, or whatever seems appropriate, that all committees get the reminder, here's this, go over it again. You get new people who came on who weren't there at the beginning, and so that they can go, oh, gee, I always assumed that we couldn't do X, Y, or Z, and here it says we can ask for that, and that seems really important to me, and everybody who was there at the beginning goes, oh, I forgot about that, you're right. So just that regularized, one-size-fits-all for the committees may be very appropriate. Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I remember the Recreation Committee's first meeting, and Jesse Carpenter was there and gave us an orientation, and I was the chair, and she said the word quorum, and I just dropped out of the whole conversation. That was part of the rules, that we had to have a quorum to make anything happen, and I just went, oh no, not a quorum. But it was very helpful. I remember you had handouts. I think it's just like our orientation. To me, the three new council members, we had a great orientation. We probably needed to go back and revisit it, because that first initial getting past the fear of it all. I'm speaking for myself, not for the other two, but getting past the fear of it all, you're not really in as good a listening mode as you could be. And it's true of the committees as well. They're just volunteer folks who want to just make the city better. And sometimes they don't always hear everything that's being said. I think it would be great to set up some expectations. I know you gave us, I think, I actually just saw it the other night. It wasn't rules and regulations. It was something about what we were expected to do. It's a whole sheet of what the committee was expected to do, and it was very good. And I always went back and revisited that with the committee. It might be better if we had someone meet with the chair and have them go over the information with the committee. Just food for thought. Everybody, maybe once every couple of months, go over it with the committee. I also think council members should be involved with the committees. I've always thought that. I thought that when I was on that side, and I still think it on this side. I don't know when you fit it into your schedule, but I think people are shooting daggers at me up here, but I think it's important, because then we know what's going on with these volunteer committees. This is what makes our city run. And the more they're involved, the more the people are involved, I think the better it is, most of the time, she says, qualifying that. Thank you.
Daggers.
Yeah, no, there's more daggers coming.
Councilmember Schultz.
I'm hiding under the table here.
I like the mayor's idea of trying to at least maybe annually provide from the clerk's office basic information on, well, I won't repeat what he already suggested, but I just want to support that idea. And I have, I reflect back on my 4 years serving on the Public Safety Citizens Advisory Committee, and some of the frustrations and positive things that occurred during that time, because that was really my very first exposure of any sort with the ongoing workings of the city, which is why I kind of got involved with it. I figured, let's pick the committee I know least about and start from there, and then just sit there. And I guess the first year I sat and listened mostly. But at times it was a little discouraging. And I do remember vividly that during that entire time, on one occasion, a member of the city council came to attend the meeting. There was a guy, I remember exactly who, I think his name was Bruce Williams. It was this guy over here. That's right. And I was like, so, I guess I'll use a simple word, tickled, that a member of the city council would come to this meeting and kind of, without sounding corny, honor us with his presence, because it kind of said, well, I'm interested in what you guys are doing in this room once a month. And it just made me feel like, I don't know, hopeful and encouraged, and I think it boosted the morale of the committee. But at other times, it was discouraging, because I remember once we spent hours debating whether or not we should make reports on our work program, and could we get the city council to pay attention to it, and we conducted a meeting in this room before it was renovated, And I think the mayor, Mayor Porter was there, and one other city council member showed up for this city council/committee meeting. And that was it. And it was a little discouraging by the fact that we didn't have more active participation on that one occasion. So I think that it's important, because you realize that these committees or task forces, or whatever they are, is really sometimes the very first effort that many citizens or residents try to make to kind of figure out a way to participate or to get engaged or get themselves informed or see if they can make an effect. And sometimes it's very tentative, and then people can be easily discouraged. And so therefore, I think that we need, and I've thought about this a lot, to provide some kind of a support that emanates from the city council, perhaps through the clerk, down to these various committees, to let them know that we think as a city council that their work is important, and their work, we rely on their input. And even though that may, to us sitting here on the city council, seem, well, that's self-evident. I don't think it is self-evident. I know Kay has proposed that, that city council members take an assignment of a committee or committees. I have supported that idea in the past. I still think it's a good idea. Even if the city council member only made it a point to attend a committee once a year, that would be a lot from the standpoint of the average citizen whose limited exposure to the city government and the city council is so low. And so I would encourage us to think in those directions. I don't want to obligate any of us sitting up here to having some responsibility for these committees, because then I think that might subvert the whole point of having committees. But I do think some kind of connection would be terrifically beneficial to the spirit and the morale of these committees, as well as practical help. Sorry, I will cease.
I thought you had, that's why I started.
I know. Well, because my mind didn't stop working.
Let me just say that your remarks prompt me to say something that I think may be a little bit more nuanced than I may have expressed in the past about the idea of something like a council liaison to a committee. I've always said that I was opposed to that, and I still am, but let me just say that I think that council members availing themselves of the opportunity to go to a committee meeting, to meet with a committee, can be a very good idea. And I think the types of things that Councilmember Schultz was just talking about can be very helpful. What I've always resisted is kind of going down the line and saying, okay, you're going to be the liaison to this one, you're going to be the liaison to that one, and it makes it the province of one council member to kind of be responsible for conveying back and forth to the committee and then back to the council about what that committee's up to. The concern in the past has always been that it then becomes kind of that council member's bailiwick, that council member's little kind of private club of you can kind of convince them to go the way that you want to go, and it kind of becomes, well, gee, now the council as a whole has asked the committee to do certain things, and we want to hear back from them. We don't want them bringing back what this one council member thinks is the way that things should be done, so that it colors what they bring back to us.
Unless, of course, it's me. Thanks.
So let me just point out that I think it's a good thing when council members can show up to a committee or a task force, and it would be wonderful if we kind of rotated through, and there was an expectation on the part of many of these committees that at every meeting there might be a council member who shows up, and it would be a different one, and we would all get a little bit of a flavor, and they would get the broad input from the council as a whole, remembering that we want to give them the opportunity to come together and bring us some recommendations rather than we're just there all the time telling them, no, you should do this, no, you should do that. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I certainly agree with a lot that's been said tonight. I think it's an interesting topic, and I hope that we put it on the agenda sometime. But I think tonight we're supposed to be talking about reconstituting the Committee on the Environment, and
Well, we may be able to do a much better job after having had this conversation.
but if we can move back to that in the interest of time.
I think that's a fine suggestion.
Thank you.
So we will move first to the Committee on the Environment, and I was going to turn to, I think, Councilmember Mayle, you put some of this together, and I want to give you a chance to kind of provide any comments that you wanted to on this.
Thank you, Mayor. So as the council will remember, we talked about the main issue we talked about from the previous draft was the question of council being a part of and city staff being a part of the committee, those being recommendations of the Sustainable Maryland's guidance, the program guidance. And so what we talked about was, and I think it was Councilmember Grimes who may have initially suggested it, or the mayor, I don't recall which, but could we create sort of a parallel structure where the committee would convene somewhat like the Stormwater Board? And so that's what I attempted to do here, was create a process, create a requirement that, that I think I have in here, that meet at least twice a year. The members of the committee, the appointed citizen members of the committee, would meet with City Council for the purposes of discussing, the elements of getting certified under the system, and presumably, although it doesn't state it in here, the city would focus on the city's commitments in part in that presentation. I didn't think it was necessary to lay that out. There are a few other changes in here, for example, just narrowing or simplifying, reducing some redundancies in the duties and responsibilities of the committee. None of it was intended to be, it was really intended to reduce duplication. What I had seen and what we had talked about last time is duplication. We talked about term limits, and so we had previously had two continuous terms. I think a number of council members and the mayor indicated, what about 3? So it says 3 now instead of 2. And the committee size, the overall citizen committee size, has been reduced to between 11 and 15. And then sort of simplified, the membership has been simplified to having a small number of business representation, community organizations representation, and then just interested residents with people with policy expertise covered within that, or I shouldn't just say policy expertise, policy science, et cetera, expertise covered in that list. And this was my best attempt to both cover the sort of membership criteria that Sustainable Maryland talked about in having community participation, as well as be fairly faithful to the original language in the original code section on the committee's membership. So, much of these lists of criteria, for example, outreach skills related to environmental science, et cetera, those are things from the original charter for the committee. But I just tried to put them in here in slightly different ways. I think that's the meat of what's in here. There's one additional statement of purpose, which is, again, in regards to this joint meeting of the council and the committee.
Okay, thank you. Let me just point out one question I had on this, and then I'll go to colleagues. As I was looking at it, and looking at the bottom of the first page and the top of the second page, where it's talking about for the different categories of committee members, no less than whatever it is, 5, 4, or 2 of the various categories. And I thought to myself, gee, if it's set up that way, if there isn't that number for that particular subset, does that mean that there can't be a quorum of the committee, that there is no, kind of legal committee if we're talking about 11 to 15 and you don't have that breakdown? So, I'm wondering about how that language might possibly be changed so that it's advisory, that this is the guideline, but that it's not that you have to have that. And I'm thinking about at the Council of Governments, at the board meeting, we have to have at least one representative from the district, one from Maryland and one from Virginia, and we have to have a quorum. and we have had a quorum where there isn't somebody from the District of Columbia, and therefore we cannot vote on anything.
And I think, I thought about that point too. I think because the preceding sentence says, efforts shall be made to have representation of the following, that would be in terms of, and we could add clarification during the process of appointments, efforts shall be made by council. You could add those details in. But I think because it's efforts will be made, I would assume that would not create a problem with quorum, but, I don't know.
Okay, that's helpful to point that out.
That's the way I thought about it anyway.
Thanks. Councilmember Schultz.
Yeah, I think it's important to reconstitute this committee. I generally like the language that Councilmember Mayo has proposed. It might need some tweaking, but I think it's an awfully good start. I think that it will probably attract a number of people who will want to be on the committee, simply because, if for no other reason than the ongoing legacy of the Task Force on Environmental Action. There's an awful lot of unfinished business with regard to that report, as we all know, including, of course, just getting the sustainability coordinator brought on board, whether in the form of a person or the form of a contract. And it would seem to me also, and this is probably more of a question, Councilmember Mayo, if you would envision that that sustainability coordinator, whatever character that is, would be kind of the staff support for this environmental committee.
Yeah, I would certainly think that would make sense, especially since we still have a task before us in terms of figuring out what actually to do and what to implement. And so there would be a real reason for these two bodies to get together with that person.
Yeah, I would think. I think they both would benefit from
I just wanted to make it in some ways evergreen, so who knows whether we'll have a sustainability position or contract 3 years from now.
Right.
So I didn't explicitly write that in,
Right.
but I agree that that's what I would hope would happen.
Yeah. And of course, one thing I think that looks like it will be permitted is this sustainability mandate from the state of Maryland, and the need to create a green team in the composition that the state regulations require. And you've built that in here fairly nicely, because if we didn't have this, we didn't invent the environmental committee, then we'd have to have this green team anyway if we're going to achieve the recognition that we want to get. So I think it makes sense, basically, and I'm in support of it.
Other comments? So it sounds like people are generally in favor of this draft. Sounds like the numbers and the breakdown looks pretty good. Any questions or concerns from staff about the level of staff participation in that joint 2 meetings per year? Okay. So it sounds like we have something that is ready to go forward with some possible final tweaking of language for some particular thing that might be of concern. So we're ready to go forward and reconstitute that committee. So the second committee is the...
I'm sorry, Mayor, could you
Yes.
just confirm, so what happens next?
We'll come back with
final copy.
whatever we need for a resolution, I would imagine.
So what this would be is an ordinance amending the city code
Okay.
to amend the description of the Committee on the Environment and basically replace it with this. So it would come back as a 2-reading ordinance.
In that resolution, in the whereas clauses, could we, just with regard to Councilmember Schultz's comment just now, could we have a whereas that talks about, whereas the city has a need for its staff focused on sustainability to interact with, just something along the lines that creates that expectation. Does that make sense, Councilmember Schultz, in terms of, yeah?
Yep.
Okay. Good. So that will come back fairly quickly so that we can go ahead and be ready to supply names and get it up and running. So the second piece is the Safe Roadways Committee. Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. I want to address a question remark made by Councilmember Schultz actually a few weeks ago, which was what this committee would be working on. My answer is that, yes, possibly more specificity is needed per the staff comments that were made in the cover note. I had worked on this with Councilmember Daniels-Cohen, and often I prefer things to be less specific. I will admit that. You might have picked that up because that gives more latitude, but I understand that there are demands made on other people than just the committee members. So Councilmember Schultz had asked what this committee would work on. I know that my most recent city committee was the Tacoma Junction Task Force, and many of the issues in that task force were roadways issues, roadways both walker safety. We've had people come before this council in the 6 months, less than 6 months I've been on it, to ask about, to deliver a petition about the poor quality of the sidewalks in Tacoma Junction, to ask for an additional crossing guard at Tacoma Junction, requests that we responded to complain. There's an open petition going on right now about the signal timing and the need, it's a petition addressed to the governor of Maryland, actually, about the signal timing in Tacoma Junction. I have to say I don't know whether that situation has improved at all because the State Highway Administration is not great at providing the city with information so far as I know. These are all the types of functions where the Safe Roadways Committee could operate. I forgot bicycles in Tacoma Junction, facilitating bicycle safety, also places to park them. For that matter, there's also the desire, I don't know where this went, to have car sharing, a zip car in Tacoma Junction. These are all things that the Safe Roadways Committee can and should get involved in with research, with community outreach, with interaction with various governmental agencies, the City of Tacoma Park, and also other agencies that are not city. That could be the county, which is responsible for many of the signals around here, the State Highway Administration, the transit agencies, the companies and agencies that are involved in bike sharing and bicyclist operations and so on. So, and those examples I gave were only Tacoma Junction. There are other issues in other parts of the city that I'm working on. For instance, the desire of many residents to see an upgrade in the traffic measures at the Holly and Philadelphia intersection. People would like to see potentially, for instance, blinking red lights to supplement the stop signs that are there now. So once again, these are functions that are present through, these are needs that are present throughout the city. I'll just add one more. We are responding in a positive manner to requests from residents of the Long Branch Sligo neighborhood to add traffic calming measures in their neighborhood. But there are other pending needs. For instance, the desire to see a narrowed entrance from Sligo Creek Parkway onto Flower Avenue. For the third time, these are all things that a Safeway Roadways Committee could work on behalf of the council and on behalf of the residents of Tacoma Park. So that's my somewhat long-winded answer to Council Member Schultz. What would this committee work on? Thank you.
Other comments? Okay. Any comments on the language on this draft? Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. And ditto to what Seth said. You said everything I wanted to say, which is always handy. I do wonder if calling it the Safe Roadways Committee captures the breadth of what Councilmember Grimes was talking about. I'm happy to leave it this way because I don't think we need to, wordsmith over it. But I do like expanding the language in it a bit so that it does, in fact, list some of the things that Councilmember Grimes was talking about.
Councilmember Schultz.
I think Councilmember Snipper makes a good point. Safe Roadways was the historical name for this this committee, but it may be that there's an awful lot in a name. Can make a huge difference. And frankly, I'm willing to support, in general, almost the creation of any kind of committee if there's evidence if it's self-evident, I guess, that there will be people eager, and enough people eager and willing to serve on the committee, because that's really what we want. We want citizen participation. My concern, unlike with the proposed environmental committee, is that I have not seen residents coming into this room clamoring for such a committee to be created. True, there have been issues, like the issue of sidewalks and the issue of traffic calming, that people have talked and fought about. But we have created regulations, administrative regulations in the city for how traffic calming and sidewalk decisions, whether to build or not to build, et cetera, will be processed. If a committee could see itself facilitating something like that, I mean, and literally facilitating, then I'd be happy to support it. On the other hand, if it's just going to be some more thumbs in the soup, creating more complications than the city staff already have in trying to get traffic calming or sidewalks built or any of these other things, then that's another story. So I don't think it's self-evident to me that we have a constituency here of people who are willing to serve on it. On the other hand, I will support it in any case, just on the principle that let's give it a try and see what happens. And after a year, if the committee has had difficulty attracting members and gaining quorums, and then we can reconsider it. But I think that's about where I stand on it right now.
I'll go to colleagues in a second. I'll just say that as you were talking about possibilities for other names, one thing that I recall, I don't think it was a committee in the city, but it was a previous incarnation in some way of considering some of these types of issues, and it was called something like alternative transportation modes. And I don't know whether there's any wording in there that gets at something or not, but I'll just toss that in there that has been a previous concern.
Or community mobility or citizen mobility or something like that.
Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
I'm just going to also underline what Councilmember Grimes said. Based on just spending the last year and a half on the Tacoma Junction Task Force, all these were issues that we covered in depth. And to have a committee, and I'm not sure Safe Roadways Committee, if you think about roadways, and safety, it could be walking, bicycling, it can be all kinds of safety, because a roadway is a roadway. I'm thinking of it in the broadest of terms. I know wordsmithing, we might be able to come up with a little bit, something that's more all-inclusive, but I'm not sure that's not a bad word or a bad committee name. Back to the signal timing at Tacoma Junction, just based on all the signatures from the people who wanted a crossing guard, I think we've got people who would be willing to serve on a committee. There's lots and lots of parents of children who want their kids to have the ability to be safe on their bicycles, be safe walking, all of the above. And I remember on the Recreation Committee when the bike share first started happening in D.C., we took that up as a Recreation Committee to get a bike share at the junction, and found out that I think it was a $60,000 downstroke and went, but it may even happen. So that's, and zip cars, all the above. I think that this is, and I know there's a question about the safe routes to school. I don't think there'll be a clash. I think the Safe Routes to School is an excellent program, and they may even complement each other. But again, I think I prefaced something last week. I do view the world through rose-colored glasses, which is good news sometimes and not so good news. So, thank you.
Councilmember Snipper.
Just a quick response to Councilmember Schultz. You may recall we had a number of bicyclists come over the years and talk about bicycle safety. We've had a number of people talk about zip cars, the narrowing of the entrance, Flowers, Sligo. I think there's a fair number of folks who would participate on those committees, on the committee from those different groups.
Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you. In terms of the name, happy where it is, but also happy for something like Committee for Better Transportation. Better is a broader term than just safe, but includes safe. Transportation is broader than roads, but I'm also happy not to debate it for great length. The comment I wanted to focus on was in the statement of purpose, one of the two purposes, the second one is to encourage Tacoma Park residents to use alternatives. So that's explicitly an advocacy directly to citizens. There's no council in that process. But I note that later on, item 5 under C, structure, is the committee individually or as a whole may lobby or provide comments or recommendations to entities other than the council only to the extent that they are consistent with established policies of the city or as authorized through formal action of the city council. So is being authorized on behalf of city council everything that's in that previous statement, or are these things somewhat in conflict? I just found this second language here, essentially a restriction on lobbying by the committee as an official entity to be somewhat out of character, I guess, with most of the rest of the committee charters that I had seen. And so I just sort of saw those two things stood out in my mind, and I didn't know if that was an issue or not. Councilmember Grimes, do you want
may I just respond to that? You'll note that the items that you pointed out are not ones that were altered from the current code. The approach was to do minimal alterations. I mean, they're quite extensive, but they're minimal all the same. I certainly wouldn't have any trouble changing that, but that was just those are just legacy items, the direct advocacy and so on.
I mean, I like the idea of the committee being able to go out and publish a story in the newsletter on bike paths in Tacoma Park, or sort of otherwise, go off on their own without. I mean, they probably wouldn't ask us for permission anyway, in reality. But anyway, the language is there.
I think that the language probably came from a different committee in the past that went out and advocated for various things, and elected officials at other levels had the impression that they were representing the city, and in fact, they did not agree with the city council, and we had to point out to elected officials in Annapolis that this was not a city position that was being taken. And one question I had on the structure down at the bottom of the first page, the note I made down there was about members electing co-chairs or other officers as it shall deem necessary. Do we generally, with the structures of committees, say that they will have elections annually or every 2 years, or do we just leave it to the committee to decide, well, gee, we had elections and we had co-chairs that we're happy with and they've been co-chairs for 10 years and we're not going to change it? Do we get into that with committees?
We did. This was a cut and paste. This was a copy and paste from probably from the environment, where we have the same language under D1. The committee shall organize to. This is environment. Committee shall organize to accomplish its purposes and elect from its members 2 co-chairs and other officers as it deems necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same problem.
And my thought is that may have been the case in where we've had task forces where they had a limited duration, but when we have ongoing committees, if we just say go ahead and elect co-chairs, do we want to say it should happen on some kind of regular basis?
I would stick the word annually in there, and with no language about whether someone can be reelected.
Right. Just to give the committee that opportunity.
I support that for both.
Okay.
But the environment also then.
Mm-hmm. So people are in agreement on that? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we want that language in both annually. Okay. Councilmember Schultz, did you have further comments?
I suggest, since there are so many people in the city who would be interested in all of these issues, and perhaps even getting on the committee, now that I have been corrected, that we put it out to the citizens to come up, or the residents, whatever the proper word is these days, to come up with a name for this committee and see what they come up with. Give them 2 weeks to do that, or something like that, because I think that'll generate interest in the committee, particularly if they can name it.
I see.
I will happily survey my constituents on that question.
I think maybe that's a good way to go. If we put the word out that we're going to be reconstituting this committee, we can leave the name the same if people wish, but if people have ideas for a better name for the committee, we're looking for that, and we'll take the input so that as we revise, as we have the ordinance that revises the functioning of this committee, we'd be happy to take any suggestions for a name change, and we'll do that at the same time. So just put the word out. Okay, do we have any other comments on this item? Seeing none, we will move along to the last item for the evening, which is a continued discussion of council recognition and honoring members of the Tacoma Park community. The city clerk has been kind enough to put forward a, what do you call it, a draft resolution. She attached the comments that I provided last time. I'll just note one thing that I left off of my comments last time was I forgot to note that we have the Azalea Awards, which is a very appropriate way for people to get recognition in the community. It's not something that the city does. It's something that the Tacoma Foundation and The Voice do. But I think it's an integral part. People think of it as those are citywide awards, and the council has provided this room at cut rate to do that because of its importance to the community and because it's in alignment with what we want to see. So I just wanted to note that I had left that off of that list. Do people want to go forward with a resolution establishing a group to do this? Take comments, Councilmember Grimes.
I think it's a fine idea. I don't have much to contribute except for a name thing. I would suggest this be called a task force rather than a committee because it is a limited duration, correct, and it has a single specific purpose.
Okay, Councilmember, I don't know who was there first. Snipper.
Thank you, Councilmember Grimes. That was the suggestion I had, actually, that we call it a task force, and I thoroughly support this.
Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
I also support it. I think it's a great idea. It gives it can give the city some direction in how to honor. It's many, really, I think I called the swimming pool and Joyce Siemens and the Adventist Community Services jewels, but we've got some real jewels here in Tacoma Park, and probably more than a lot of cities have, and this would be a great way to figure out a way to honor them consistently.
Any other comments? Councilmember Grimes.
Yeah, one thing that occurs to me, since you mentioned the Azalea Awards, and I've certainly watched them for a number of years, I would propose adding one word on number 2 at the bottom of the first page of the resolution. A variety of options to recognize and memorialize. There's a word that should change. It should maybe be honor rather than memorialize, since memorials normally people who are no longer with us. Not only to recognize and honor those, but to identify, recognize, and honor, because we are not at all certain that we're reaching everyone in the community who is deserving of recognition and honor. So I would suggest adding that one word, identify.
Good idea. Councilmember
Changing
Schultz.
memorialize to honor.
One of the things
Adding
that's
both.
I've been curious about for a while is that nowhere, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, in the city, are we making much of an effort that I can see to memorialize people who have served the city in the past or served our country in the past. And in most small towns in America, we find prominently displayed memorials to the fallen who've served in wars, firefighters, police officers, and people like that, in addition, of course, to others like the Sam Abbotts of this world and Belle Zieglers who honored the city with their work. And I'm not necessarily asking that we change what's been put forward here, but I kind of wish that we, at some point in time, we give some consideration to not only how do we honor people, not only living, but posthumously, and where do we honor them? And hopefully that'll be one of the things that this committee or task force, whatever it's going to be, will take under advisement. Municipalities across America do it in a whole variety of ways, from the traditional statue in the middle of the New England town square to plaques under trees or plaques on buildings or whatever. And I know that I just think that that's something that we're missing. We don't, for example, there's nowhere in the city that we even actually have a fountain. And almost every city has to have at least one fountain. I'm not talking about a drinking fountain. I'm talking about something that makes a big splash. It's old-fashioned, but what the hell, I'm old-fashioned. I'm old enough to be old-fashioned. So, and I just think it would be something that would be help create, give some centrality to the sense of our city, that this is the center, this is where we honor the people that we really have the highest regard for. That's all I want to say at this point in time.
As you were talking, I was thinking about one place in particular, and Councilmember Siemens had the same idea. There's the park that's the triangle across from this building, which is called Memorial Park.
Yeah, it's a memorial park.
But I said, well, gee, is that what it's called? And what else is in there besides the flagpole? Councilmember Siemens said he thought...
There's
What is
a
there?
tablet-like thing
tablet, yeah.
that has the 4 service seals. There are also 2 stone markers in the ground memorializing some guy who, sorry, I shouldn't call him some guy, a serviceman who was killed on duty, and I forget what the other one is. But
So it sounds like we should familiarize ourselves with a memorial park that we have, that we don't really understand, and possibly use that as a basis for doing some things over there, because I mostly think of it as the place that had the crooked tree that got cut down and that has a flagpole. And I can't claim that I have ever walked on that piece of property.
Yeah, I know that I haven't. And I think it'd be great to make a big deal out of that little triangle.
Some more times.
well, there are a couple of benches, not close in there, but not far out from there. Could put additional benches or other things that would make it more attractive for people to sit in there. For that matter, we don't do any ceremonies that I know of on Memorial Day or any time like that.
Right, and I've had requests from people about what does the city do on Memorial Day, and can there be something over there?
I think that's important.
Councilmember Diane Cohen.
Yes, I think this past year, the year 2011, was the first year that Boy Scout Troop 33 actually had a ceremony on Veterans Day on November 11th. And I've also had people requesting, what do we do on November 11th? And, maybe a bit late for Memorial Day this year, but it's certainly a possibility for the future. Because it's really quite a lovely, gentle park, even in the middle of all that Philadelphia Avenue. It's a gentle, has great calming energy over there by the structure, I'll call it a structure, the plates, whatever, the marble stuff.
So it sounds like we definitely need to add that to the inventory of things that we need to be more aware of and incorporate in deciding what we need to do.
Right, we used to have, I know that I've attended services there on Memorial Day in the past, and there may be soldiers from Tacoma Park that should be honored there, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good idea. So it sounds like we're in agreement that we want to go forward with this ad hoc, task force, and add a couple things to the materials that we give them. And I think if any of us has any additional ideas of things that we would like to add to provide information about the discussion that we've had here, any thoughts about Memorial Park, any other things, so that we can get the complete scope of how we can think about this and how we can go forward. Any other comments? Does the city clerk need anything else to put together?
I think I've got it, but the one thing is, when I drafted this, I was thinking about including to memorialize, and I thought...
honor and
Honor
memorial.
and...
Yeah, both words.
Both things. So in other words, you want it to be broad enough to incorporate that as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So identify, recognize, honor, and memorialize. Good. Okay. Thank you. I believe we are finished for the evening. Enjoy it while you got it.
Can we have a break now?
Yes.
And since today is my birthday, I want to thank you all for making it a quick session.
Hey, wait a minute. Okay.
Should we sing happy birthday to him?
No.
No, absolutely not.
No, we'll
Thank you.